Good afternoon, croeso, welcome to the gate to
Thank
Mr. Malcolm Beynon, who deals with glass and is hoping to come back in the future when we're open to the public and give us a workshop. But today you're here to talk about what the workshop involves, and really what I'd like to know is what got you into glass in the first place.
I got into glass by an accident. I left my job and went back to university to do a teacher's degree because I wanted to pass my knowledge on from an engineering background, which has been a bit of a passion to pass knowledge on. And whilst I was there, I had a project to do on recyclable materials. And I thought, well, glass is such a sustainable product. It's a commodity that we can't do without. So I thought I'd do a project on glass. So in UWTSD in Swansea, they got a fantastic glass facility there on course. So I went to have a chat with the technician.
Yeah.
And from that point on, I decided to do my glass degree.
But you get to teach when you do the workshops.
Yes, so I got the best of both worlds. I enjoy doing what I'm working with glass, and I enjoy passing the knowledge on in a class with participants.
So where do you start?
Right, well, health and safety is the main thing. Glass is dangerous. The products that we use can be dangerous. The tools, use your common sense and be aware of safety aspects of working with glass. Glass does produce powder, dust, which can get into your lungs, so if you're working with glass in a non-ventilated area, you could have a distractor, fan, and especially a mask as well. But to start with, really, is you've got to have a vision, you've got to have a design or an idea, and then you go from there. I would start with something basic like a sun catcher. It's nice straight cuts and they're easy to manage, especially for a beginner.
Yeah.
So you start off with a rough idea, which I started off with that, and then you just do some measurements on what size you want, which I've done there, and then you outline it so that when you place your glass on top of it, you can actually see, and it's easier for you to cut. In glass terms, when it comes to leading or copper foiling, on a bigger version, or even on a small little pane, we would call it a cartoon, and that's the design on a piece of paper.
Oh, right.
It's called a cartoon, where you've got everything that you need as a glass worker. If you're leading, especially doing leaded windows, stained glass windows, the main part you got to remember about is the heart. The heart is the point where the two glass pieces butt up against the heart, which is the piece of lead inside, which comes down, and you've got all those designs and measurements on your cartoon. But that's a different course again. This is just copper foiling, which you just use copper foil and some solder and a soldering iron. You could have a glass cutter. You could have a pair of grozers, which you use to snap the glass. A square, straight edge, a ruler, cutting oil, flux brush to put the flux onto the copper foil. This is the copper foil that you put on the glass. This is to keep your soldering iron nice and clean, and very important. Always keep the tip of your soldering iron nice and clean and flat. Otherwise you'll have problems when it comes to soldering. And it's just a basic kit.
So a messy person like me would struggle a bit, I'm guessing.
Right then, so I've got the design. So from that design, I've gone and picked 3 shades of glass, whereas when you place it on top, you can actually see the design coming through, which is easier. Now, another point that you should take into consideration as well is when you come to cutting and marking out your glass, you don't want to waste it. So instead of just putting that onto your paper and then just drawing that and just cutting that one piece out, you try and be conservative and make the most out of your glass. I've actually cut a strip which is the size of each triangle, and I've just replicated it throughout that one piece of glass. So when you've cut those, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces out of one piece of glass, instead of just wasting it. You always decide whether you're going inside or outside of the mark that you've made. If I was to cut outside one and inside on another one,
they'd be
uneven. So you've got to remember, stick to a rule of thumb. I've always cut on the inside, so it seems to be a lot easier. And when it comes to working your cartoon, that's the way you're supposed to do it. Now, another thing you've got to remember is on the glass cutter, you've got a diamond cut wheel, and from the edge to the centre of my wheel is 2 millimetres. So where you've got your line there, come in 2 millimetres, and then you'll see that the wheel will actually sit on the inside of that line.
Right.
So all you do is get some cutting fluid. Cutting fluid, 1 to lubricate the wheel, and 2 it helps the glass split. And then just patience, mark the glass in 1 stroke. Never stop and then go back. And then all you do, you put your thumbs either side of the glass and pull away from yourself, and the glass should come away. And that's all you do.
Gosh, that's amazing. That's a technique you've learned over a long period of time, isn't it?
Yeah, yes. You get used to different glass, because this glass is a flat stained glass, which is smooth either side, and this one is a textured glass, but it's smooth one side and it's textured that side, which gives it that effect. So if you had a design where you had to mark it that way with a ripple up, yes, mark it, but always turn it round and cut it on the flat side. I'll just cut that one just to show. So always lubricate, wipe the excess off. So you've got that nice noise, that scoring noise, you know you've got a nice cut. Same again, thumb either side of the line and pull away. Now, the other thing as well, you've seen these on my desk. If you've got another piece where it gets down and you can't put your thumbs either side, what you do then, you use, these are called grozers. Now these, there's a curve on one side, I don't know if you can see that. There's a curve and then a straight edge.
Yeah.
Now with these, you can use these exactly the same way to pull them apart, the glass after you've cut it. Plus you can shape your glass with these. And all you do, you put it on and you just work the grozers on the glass, slowly but surely, and that's that, it's gone flat. So you want to get that now, copper foil. So because you've used oil cutter on your glass, if I was to put this copper foil, which is conductive, that's why we use it, straight onto there, it's not going to stick because there's a thin film of oil on it from the cutting oil. So make sure that it's nice and dry and clean. Now that's ready for copper foiling. So the copper foil, it's sticky. It's like a thin strip of copper with adhesive on one side. And we use copper foil because it's very conductive and the solder will flow on it, and it just puts it all together nice and tight, nice and clean, with no effort at all. So you just want to cut enough. You can snap it with your fingers, it's quite thin. You've got to fill all that edge, but then you just want to fold over enough to get the solder to adhere the two main parts to hold it all together. So all you do then is pull the backing off. There you go. So that's all it is, it's a thin, sticky bit of copper. Now, try to get the join of the copper foil where it's going to be hidden. Now, I wouldn't want to put a join there because it's going to be seen. Even though you're going to solder it over it, it can cause complication. It's best to put a join where you're not going to really see it. So just fold the edges over with your finger. All you do is pull the backing off and just carefully try to get it centre. Carefully run your finger up there so it's stuck on, and then with your forefinger and thumb, fold the edge over and run your finger and thumb up without cutting yourself. But this is where the preparation comes in, because if I hadn't done a good cut on these, when you do that, you'll soon find out you haven't done it right, because you've cut your fingers. Same again. Press it down, run it across, and just snap it off. And that's one copper foiled piece of glass. Now, just to make sure, there's no fancy tools for this. Anything that's round without any gouges in it, always rub the copper foil down so it takes out the air bubbles if there's any lumps and bumps, and it makes sure that it adheres to the glass. What you should have is enough to make your pattern. All I've got here is an old corkboard. This is where you're going to solder. Right. And the reason I'm using a corkboard is for this purpose. You put your first piece down, and all it does, it holds it all nice and tight together. So I'm just pushing this slightly that way, making sure the glass is the right way, and then just pushing these pins in just to hold it. So that's it. So you just pop them in. Now, when you're doing lead windows, lead stained glass, instead of using these, you'd be using a bit of chipboard and horseshoe nails. It's been done for hundreds of years where they've used horseshoe nails, because a horseshoe nail has got an angled edge to it, and that's what they find that when you hammer them in, it actually pushes the glass nice and tight because of the angle. When you're happy with that, the next step for this now would be to flux. Now, this is horrible stuff. It smells. It's what it actually says on it, may be fatal if swallowed. So be careful with that when you're using it, and you don't use a lot of it.
Right. I can imagine why. And you certainly don't put it in your tea.
Don't put it in. Try not to make tea or coffee with it, and definitely don't drink any fluids or eat any food when you're working with glass. That's one big no-no, because you never know. You could, because this will be going into there, and you could splash them into your tea. I've done it before where you're painting or something, and you've gone and dipped your paintbrush in your cup of tea. Big no-no. No foods or beverages when you're working with glass. Flux makes the solder flow.
Right.
So when you've got the flux on it, it stops it oxidizing as well. All you do is just dip your brush in it, and you just go around all the copper, all the seams that you want soldered at first. Don't do the whole thing because it does evaporate, and it's best to keep it to one part at a time, and then just take your time. So I know this is nice and warm, so just make sure it's nice and clean and it's melting. And all you do, you hold the soldering iron at, I would say, between 45 and 50 degrees angle, and you just place it onto the solder and onto the copper foil and just leave it run. So just carry on where you left off and try and feed it into the next part. This is a 60-40 lead and tin. you can get a 50-50, but it doesn't flow as nice. And I find this part is the nice therapeutic part. Now, as you can see, some of these have beaded nice, and that was the start of it. So if you've got any unevenness, like you've got there, all you do is tap your solder, put a blob on it, and all you do is just place it on and off. And what will happen is that it'll level out the solder and it'll make it look like one solid bead, and you get rid of that unevenness, which gives it that nice finish, which you've got all the way around there. Now you've got that in place, what you've done is actually stuck all the outer parts to the inner part. So in theory now, you can take all these off and repeat the process all around the edge of the sun catcher. So again, a little bit of flux. Don't need a lot. And again, because you're not joining these sides, or you just need to run the solder over them just to seal it, and there's enough on your soldering tip to coat the copper. And whilst you're doing this, what you're actually doing as well, you're not only sealing it with solder, you're actually melting the adhesive and making it adhere to the glass even better. Now, the next stage from that is just it doesn't take long for it to cool down because they're only thin beads. Obviously that would take longer to cool down, but that is sufficient to turn it over, and you'll repeat that on this back edge as well. So I won't go into that now. What I will show you is that a lot of people forget to do the actual edges themselves, and a lot of people go wrong where they'll put on a stand like that and they'll just go around. Well, what will happen is that as you're soldering, if you don't keep it level, it'll run down and you'll have a blob in the middle at the bottom. So whenever you're doing the edges, try and keep it as flat as possible. Tap it to make a bead, leave that cool for a couple of seconds, and then move on to the next one. And you just carry on until all the copper's covered, because if you don't cover the copper, it'll oxidize, and then that's when you'll have staining and so forth. And then all you've got to do is attach a chain or a ribbon to it, and you've got yourself a nice copper foiled sun catcher.
What else can people make at the workshops?
Anything at the workshop, from a beginners, obviously these would be beginners. Then you could, if you want something more challenging, which has got more angles, which you've got to get more precise, you've got this type of sun catcher. Obviously you've got to get your cuts right for that design to work. Or if you want to try a little bit more, you've got little angels. Instead of having just straight cuts, I don't think there's actually one straight cut on the angel. And then you go on to the tea lights, which they're all glass base. So you decide how big the tea light is going to be at the base, and then you cut the glass accordingly to fit. And then you've got, which is my favourite, which I call the Harlequin cube, where you've got beveled glass as a centrepiece, and then you've got small little quadrants of different glass. Again, the base is glass as well, and that's a more intricate, busy design, which will take you a lot longer than those. But when you've mastered those and that, you'll be able to do something like this quite easily with a bit of patience. I like to try and recycle as much as I can. Some of the glass, stained glass that I use are from old windows and doors. People are quite generous, and if they're broken and they've gone past the point of no return, they give them to me and I repurpose them. So I like recycling as much as I can. The other thing as well is making basic vases or tea light holders, whichever you would like to call them. Recycling wine bottles, where you cut them and you can put a base on that and actually use it as a tea light, or a lot of people are using them as just turn them inside out and using them as a vase. That is actually powdered glass, which is called frit, and that's in the glass. That's fired in the glass. So that is recyclable glass that I've crushed up. And if you're really careful and you haven't got a machine or a bit of kit, you can wrap a bit of glass in a towel, and like you do cooking with rolling pins and you break the digestive biscuits up, you can put glass in there, break it all up and get what you need, and you just sprinkle it on there and you use a glue to hold it in place, you fire it and it's there forever.
Wow.
So I like trying to recycle as much as possible as well.
Well, it's been lovely, Malcolm, having you here today. I have learnt an awful lot. I'm absolutely fascinated. I might even be tempted to give it a go at some point.
Yes,
So,
give it a go.
We look forward to seeing you here with real people in a workshop very soon.
Great, thank you for having me. Thank you.